"Step out of the car, ma'am. Women like you don't belong in this neighborhood after dark." The words came through the rain like something cold and practiced, not shouted, not rushed, just flat enough to make the whole road feel smaller. Dr. Naomi Brooks sat behind the wheel of her dark blue sedan, both hands resting where the officer could see them, while red and blue lights flashed across the wet pavement of Ashford County like a warning that had arrived too late. The street was quiet, lined with brick homes, trimmed lawns, and porch lights glowing behind curtains that had just begun to move. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then stopped. Officer Garrett Miller stood outside her window with a flashlight angled too high, the beam cutting across her eyes, bright enough to make her blink but not enough to make her look away. Behind him, a younger officer, Ethan Cole, hovered near the patrol car with one hand on his radio and the other hanging uncertainly at his side. He looked like he wanted to speak, but had not yet learned when silence becomes a choice. Naomi lowered the window halfway. Rain misted into the car and touched the sleeve of her black coat. "May I ask why I was stopped, officer?" she asked. Her voice was calm, almost soft, and that seemed to bother Garrett more than fear would have. He leaned slightly toward the window, studying the leather seats, the clean dashboard, the federal-looking folders on the passenger side that he had not yet bothered to read. "License and registration," he said. Slowly. Naomi reached for her purse, careful, measured, every movement small enough to survive suspicion. If your heart is already with Naomi, subscribe now, because this is the kind of story where the truth does not scream when it enters the room, it waits until every liar has finished talking. Garrett took her documents without thanks. The name on the license caught the corner of his eye, but not his attention. Naomi Brooks. 38. Washington, D.C. address. He glanced back at her as though the paper had made some mistake. "Long way from home," he said. "Visiting someone?" Naomi looked past him at the patrol lights washing over the windshield, turning the raindrops red, then blue, then red again. "I have business in Ashford." Garrett gave a quiet laugh. "Business? At 10:15 at night? In a county road where we've had reports of suspicious vehicles." "What was suspicious about mine?" she asked. The younger officer's eyes moved toward Garrett, then down to the pavement. Garrett's jaw tightened, not because he had an answer, but because she had asked for one. Inside the car, Naomi could smell wet asphalt, old pine from the roadside, and the faint leather scent of the bag sitting beside her, the same brown bag her mother had carried to work for 22 years. Her mother had once been stopped on a road just like this, in a town just like this, by a man who also spoke calmly while taking away her dignity one question at a time. Naomi had been 12 then, sitting in the back seat, learning that fear could have a badge and still call itself order. Tonight, she was not 12. Tonight, she was on her way to the Ashford Police Department for a closed-door federal review that half the town was whispering about and the other half was pretending not to fear. But Garrett Miller did not know that. Not yet. He only saw a black woman alone, in a good car, on a wealthy street after dark, and in his mind, that was enough to build a case out of nothing. "Turn off the engine," he said. Naomi did. The sudden silence inside the sedan felt heavy. The wipers stopped halfway across the glass, frozen like a thought interrupted. Garrett stepped back and looked toward Ethan. "Have her step out." Ethan hesitated. "Sir, do we have?" Garrett turned his head just enough to end the sentence. Ethan swallowed. Naomi saw it all through the rain-speckled mirror, the command, the fear, the obedience forming in real time. She opened her door slowly and stepped onto the wet road, her heels touching a shallow puddle that reflected the patrol lights beneath her feet. Garrett pointed toward the front of her car. "Hands where I can see them." Naomi lifted both hands, palms open, her face steady under the rain. She did not plead. She did not shrink. She simply looked at Officer Garrett Miller and said, "Before this goes any further, I want your badge number, and I want Officer Cole's body camera turned on." For the first time that night, Garrett's expression changed. Not much. Just a flicker. But Naomi saw it. So did Ethan. And somewhere behind the curtains of Ashford County, someone stopped pretending not to watch. Naomi kept her hands raised, not high enough to look dramatic, just high enough to make the point clear. She knew how quickly a small motion could be rewritten in someone else's report. Rain gathered along the edge of her coat collar and slipped down the back of her neck, cold and thin, but she did not move to wipe it away. Officer Ethan Cole shifted beside the patrol car, his body camera light dark against his uniform. Naomi looked at it, then back at Garrett Miller. "I asked for the camera to be turned on," she said. Garrett smiled without warmth. "You ask a lot of questions for someone who was only stopped for routine safety." "Routine safety has a reason," Naomi replied. "I am asking for that reason." The street seemed to hold its breath. Behind the nearest house, a curtain moved again, slow as a guilty eye. Garrett stepped closer, lowering his voice as if kindness could be imitated by speaking softly. "The reason is that this neighborhood has had concerns. Cars circling. People coming in who do not live here. You fit the description." Naomi looked at the row of houses, at the polished mailboxes, at the security cameras tucked beneath the porch lights. "What description?" she asked. Ethan's hand twitched near his belt, not toward anything dangerous, just toward his own uncertainty. Garrett looked at him once, and the young officer turned away. Naomi had seen that look before. It was the look people gave when they wanted the world to be better, but not badly enough to risk their comfort. The leather bag sat on the passenger seat behind her open door, its brass buckle dulled by age. Her mother, Evelyn Brooks, had bought it from a thrift store in Baltimore in 1998, then carried it through courthouse hallways, school offices, and hospital waiting rooms like it was something expensive. It had been the only thing Naomi asked for after the funeral. Not jewelry. Not furniture. Just the bag, still holding the faint scent of lavender hand lotion and old paper. Naomi had packed it that morning with care, case files, witness statements, a sealed federal notice, and one small photograph of Evelyn standing beside the same county road 26 years earlier, younger than Naomi was now, her Sunday blouse wrinkled, her face proud in a way that pain had not yet learned how to bend. Ashford County was not just an assignment. It was a return. At 12 years old, Naomi had sat in the back seat of her mother's station wagon while an officer questioned Evelyn for 23 minutes because she had taken a wrong turn after cleaning a house on the hill. Naomi remembered the flashlight. The gravel under the tires. The way her mother answered every question with "yes, sir," and "no, sir," while keeping one hand on the steering wheel like it was the last piece of control she owned. Later that night, Evelyn had made tea, placed both hands around the chipped mug, and told her daughter, "Baby, do not let cruelty teach you its language." Naomi had built her whole life around that sentence. College on scholarships. Law school on borrowed sleep. Years inside civil rights offices where pain arrived in folders, photographs, recordings, and quiet voices that shook only after the door closed. She had learned that injustice rarely announced itself like a monster. More often, it wore a clean uniform, used professional words, and asked why you were making things difficult. Garrett took one slow step toward the sedan and aimed his flashlight across the passenger seat. "What is in the bag?" he asked. "Work documents," Naomi said. "For what kind of work?" "Official work." His mouth tightened again. He did not like answers that gave him nothing to push against. "Open it." Naomi's eyes moved to his face. "Do you have probable cause to search my property?" For 1 second, only the rain answered. Then Garrett exhaled through his nose, amused and annoyed at once. "You people watch too much television." Ethan looked up sharply. Naomi heard the words land. Not loudly. Loud was not required. Some sentences did their damage by sounding ordinary. She turned her head just enough to face Ethan. "Officer Cole," she said, "is your camera on?" The young officer's throat moved. His eyes flicked to Garrett, then to Naomi, then to the dark lens on his chest. "Not yet, ma'am," he said quietly. "Then turn it on," Naomi said. Her voice did not rise, but something in it filled the space between them. Ethan's fingers hovered. Garrett's stare hardened. The rain tapped against the hood of Naomi's car, soft and steady, like a clock counting down to something neither officer understood yet. Garrett Miller had worn the Ashford County badge for 19 years, long enough for people to lower their voices when his patrol car rolled past and long enough for younger officers to mistake fear for respect. He knew every road that curled through the wealthy side of town, every driveway with imported stone, every homeowner who called dispatch before checking their own window. To those people, Garrett was reliable. He arrived quickly. He used the right tone. He made certain faces feel protected and certain other faces feel warned. That was the quiet system nobody wrote down, but everybody understood. Chief Richard Harlan understood it better than anyone. For years, Harlan had praised Garrett in public meetings as a man of instinct, a seasoned officer who could smell trouble before it became paperwork. When complaints came in, Harlan called them misunderstandings. When drivers said they had been stopped for no clear reason, Harlan called it proactive policing. When black residents asked why their sons, daughters, husbands, and mothers were being questioned on streets they had every right to use, Harlan promised an internal review and let the files disappear into drawers where dust did the work of denial. Garrett learned from that silence. He learned that power did not always need to shout. Sometimes it only needed a signature, a closed office door, and a town willing to look away. Now, standing in the rain beside Naomi Brooks's sedan, he carried all of that history in his posture. His shoulders were squared, his chin slightly lifted, his flashlight steady in one hand as if the beam itself were an accusation. "Officer Cole," he said. Without looking away from Naomi, "You will keep your camera off until I tell you otherwise." Ethan froze. The young officer was only 6 months out of the academy, still clean around the edges, still saying "sir" with the desperate hope that obedience would be enough to keep him safe. He had heard stories about Garrett before joining the department. Some officers called him old school. Some called him effective. A few, always in parking lots and never inside the building, called him dangerous. Ethan had laughed along the first time because he did not know what else to do. But the laughter had felt wrong in his mouth. Tonight, the wrongness had a shape. It stood in front of him, a black woman in a rain-dark coat, hands visible, voice steady, being treated like a threat because Garrett had decided she did not match the street. "Sir," Ethan said carefully, "department policy says body cameras activate during traffic stops." Garrett turned then. Not fast. Not angry on the surface. Just slow enough to make the silence feel like a warning. "And department policy also says a senior officer can control an active scene." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir." Naomi watched the exchange without interrupting. She had spent too many years reading sworn statements not to recognize a power structure when it spoke through someone else's hesitation. Garrett stepped closer to her open car door and shined the flashlight across the passenger seat again. The beam landed on the old leather bag. On the sealed envelope. On the corner of the faded photograph tucked beneath a folder. "You said official work," Garrett said. "You carrying government documents in that bag?" "I am carrying documents related to my employment," Naomi replied. "That is not what I asked." "It is the answer I am giving without a warrant." The rain thickened for a moment, pattering across the hood of the sedan, filling the pause between them. Garrett gave a short laugh, the kind meant for Ethan as much as for Naomi. "You hear that, Cole? She knows the magic words." Naomi looked at him, and something in her face softened, not with fear, but with a disappointment so quiet it almost looked like pity. "Rights are not magic words, Officer Miller," she said. "They are the law." For the first time, Garrett's eyes narrowed at the sound of his own name. He had not told her who he was. Naomi nodded toward the badge on his chest, rain shining along its edges. "It is printed clearly," she said. "Some people still read what is in front of them." Ethan looked down to hide the smallest movement in his expression. Garrett saw it anyway. His pride shifted into something harder. He reached toward the car door and said, "Step back from the vehicle." Naomi did not move toward him. She did not move away. She simply stood on the wet pavement with her palms open and her spine straight, while the neighborhood watched from behind glass and the young officer beside the patrol car began to understand that the most dangerous moment in a person's life is often the moment they realize staying neutral is no longer neutral at all. Naomi stepped back exactly one pace, enough to show she had heard the instruction, not enough to surrender the ground beneath her dignity. The rain had turned the shoulder of the road into a thin black mirror, and in it the patrol lights bent and trembled like broken signals. Garrett moved toward the open car door, but Naomi's voice stopped him before his hand crossed the frame. "Officer Miller, I do not consent to any search of my vehicle or my personal property." She said it clearly, not loudly, every word placed with care. Ethan Cole looked at her, then at Garrett, and for the first time that night his uncertainty looked less like confusion and more like recognition. Garrett's mouth pulled into a narrow line. "You can keep reciting lines all you want," he said. "Out here, I decide what keeps this scene safe." Naomi held his gaze. "Safety cannot be whatever you need it to mean." A porch light clicked on across the street. Then another. Somewhere behind the glass, a phone camera rose, its small lens catching the flashing lights and the woman standing in the rain with her hands open. Garrett noticed it. Naomi noticed that he noticed. His shoulders tightened beneath the slick dark fabric of his uniform. "Ma'am," Ethan said quietly, almost too quietly for Garrett to hear. "Would you like me to turn on my camera now?" Garrett's head snapped toward him. "Cole." The single word landed heavy, but Ethan did not move his hand away from his chest. Naomi did not look at Ethan. She kept her eyes on Garrett, because she understood the fragile courage of someone trying to do the right thing for the first time. If she pulled too hard, it might break. If she ignored it, it might grow. "Officer Cole," she said, "your own policy exists to protect everyone at this scene. Including you." Ethan swallowed. His thumb pressed the button on his body camera. A small red light blinked to life. It was tiny, almost nothing against the wash of rain and emergency lights, but to Naomi it felt like a match struck in a dark room. Garrett stared at it. For one breath, nobody spoke. Then his voice dropped, low and controlled. "You just made this more complicated than it needed to be." "No, sir," Naomi said. "The complication began before I stopped the car." Garrett took a step closer, crowding the space without touching her, using height and uniform and rain and road to remind her where he believed power lived. "You think being calm makes you smart?" he asked. "I think being calm helps me remember everything accurately." Ethan's eyes flicked to the camera light, then to Naomi's face. She was not trembling. Not performing. Not challenging for the sake of pride. She was simply refusing to disappear. Garrett reached into the open car doorway and lifted the corner of the leather bag with 2 fingers, not opening it yet, just testing the boundary. Naomi's voice sharpened by 1 degree. "Do not touch that bag without legal authority." Garrett paused. The old leather glistened under the flashlight, the brass buckle worn from years of use. To him, it was only a bag. To Naomi, it held a mother's memory, a federal notice, and the names of families who had trusted her with their fear. She thought of Evelyn Brooks walking out of a courthouse 20 years earlier after being told there was not enough evidence to prove what everyone in that room knew had happened. She thought of the way her mother had smiled anyway, tired but unbroken, and said that one day the record would matter. Naomi had believed her. That belief had carried her through every classroom where she was underestimated, every office where her credentials were questioned twice, every case where someone whispered that maybe the victim had misunderstood. Garrett let the bag drop back onto the seat. The sound was soft, but Naomi felt it in her chest. "Fine," he said. "Then tell me what is inside." No, the word was quiet, final, and clean. Ethan looked up. Garrett blinked once. Naomi continued, "I have provided my license and registration. I have asked for the reason for the stop. I have stated that I do not consent to a search. I am not interfering. I am not resisting. I am standing here in the rain because you told me to. But I will not help you turn suspicion into permission." The street went still around that sentence. Even the rain seemed to soften against the pavement. Garrett's face changed in a way most people might have missed, but Naomi saw it. The small wound of a man used to being answered by someone he expected to intimidate. He stepped back, looked toward Ethan's camera, then toward the curtains shifting in the lit windows. His control had not vanished, but it had begun to show its seams. "Put your hands on the hood," he said. Naomi looked at the wet metal, then at him. She placed her palms on the cold surface slowly, carefully, without lowering her head. The hood carried the engine's fading warmth beneath the rain, and for a moment, that heat rose into her hands like a memory refusing to die. Naomi's palms rested on the hood, the metal slick beneath her fingers, the last warmth of the engine fading into the rain. Garrett stood behind her at an angle, close enough for his voice to stay low, far enough for the body camera to catch his outline. He seemed aware of the little red light now, and that awareness changed him. Not into someone kinder. into someone more careful with his cruelty. For the record, Garrett said, the driver is being temporarily detained due to suspicious behavior and refusal to answer basic questions. Naomi looked at the blurred reflection of her own face in the hood. Red light crossed one cheek. Blue crossed the other. For the record, she said, I answered the lawful questions and declined the unlawful ones. Ethan Cole took a breath, but did not speak. His camera blinked steadily against the rain. Garrett's patience thinned. He moved to the passenger side, opened the door wider, and leaned toward the old leather bag again. Naomi turned her head slightly. Officer Miller, I have stated I do not consent. And I have stated this is an active scene, Garrett replied. You can file a complaint later. That word, later, landed with the weight of every ignored form, every unanswered call, every folder left to yellow in a cabinet until pain became old news. Naomi did not move. Garrett lifted the bag from the seat and set it on the roof of the car. Rain struck the leather in tiny dark spots. The brass buckle caught the patrol lights and flashed once, like an eye-opening. Naomi's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed even. That bag belonged to my mother. Garrett did not look at her. Then she should have taught you to cooperate. Ethan's face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. A wince, quickly hidden. Naomi closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, she was not looking at Garrett anymore. She was looking at the photograph that had slipped from one of the folders and landed face down near the windshield wiper. Rainwater crept along its edges. Garrett opened the bag without permission and pulled out the first folder. A sealed federal envelope slid loose, then a stack of printed statements, then the small photograph turned over in the wind. Evelyn Brooks's face appeared under the wet glare of the patrol lights, young, proud, standing beside the same county road in a different decade. Naomi's breath caught, not from fear, but from the sudden ache of seeing her mother treated carelessly by the same town twice. Leave those documents where they are, Naomi said. Garrett flipped through the pages too quickly to understand them, his pride searching for something that would justify what his instinct had already decided. You always carry this much paperwork to a night meeting, he asked. When the meeting concerns people who were not believed the first time, yes. Garrett paused. But only for a moment. A porch door opened across the street. An older white man stepped halfway out, wearing a rain jacket over pajamas, phone in hand. Everything all right, officer, he called. Garrett looked up, and his voice changed instantly, smoother, neighborly. Everything is under control, Mr. Whitaker. Please stay inside. Naomi heard the difference. So did Ethan. The softness Garrett could produce when speaking to the right person. The courtesy he had chosen not to spend on her. Mr. Whitaker lingered, looking at Naomi's hands on the hood, the folders on the roof, the rain soaking her sleeves. Something uneasy moved across his face, but he still stepped back and closed the door. The lock clicked faintly through the rain. Garrett gathered the papers, but one page slipped free and landed in the puddle near Naomi's left shoe. Ethan stepped forward instinctively to pick it up. Garrett snapped, leave it. Ethan froze again. The page floated in the shallow water, ink bleeding at the corner. Naomi could see the heading even upside down, witness statement, Ashford County Traffic Stop Review. Beneath it was a name she had spoken with only 2 weeks earlier, a father who had cried quietly in her office because his teenage daughter had stopped driving to school after being pulled over 3 times in 1 month. Naomi kept her hands on the hood. Her fingers curled once against the cold metal, then relaxed. Garrett came back around with the folder in one hand and the old photograph in the other. You have a lot of interest in this department, he said. Naomi turned her face toward him, rain tracing the line of her cheek. More than you know. The answer irritated him because it did not explain enough to control. He nodded toward Ethan. Restraints. Ethan stared at him. Sir. Temporary detention. She is not complying with the investigation. Naomi spoke before Ethan could move. Officer Cole, listen carefully. I am not a threat. I have not raised my voice. I have not interfered. You are being asked to turn a traffic stop without cause into an escalation without basis. Ethan looked at Garrett, then at Naomi, and the rain seemed louder in the space between. His choices. Garrett's voice hardened. Now. Ethan stepped forward slowly, his face pale under the patrol lights. Ma'am, he said, barely above a whisper, please place your hands behind your back. Naomi's eyes stayed on him, not accusing, not forgiving, simply seeing him. I will comply, she said. And I will remember exactly who made the choice. The cuffs closed around her wrists with a soft metallic click, not loud, but final enough to make the street feel colder. Garrett exhaled as if order had been restored. But on the hood of the car, beside the rain-dark leather bag, Evelyn Brooks's wet photograph stared up at the blinking red light of Ethan Cole's camera, and the truth was already recording. The cuffs were not tight enough to bruise, but they were cold enough to make Naomi aware of every inch of skin beneath the metal. She stood beside the hood of her sedan with her hands behind her back, rain slipping down her sleeves, gathering at her wrists, and disappearing beneath the steel like the night itself was trying to enter her bones. Garrett Miller moved around the car with the slow confidence of a man arranging a scene he expected others to accept later. He stacked the folders with careless efficiency, tapped the edges against the roof, and set them beside the old leather bag as if they were ordinary papers and not the gathered voices of people who had waited years to be heard. Ethan Cole stood 3 feet away, body camera blinking, face pale under the red and blue wash of light. He had done what Garrett ordered. Naomi could see that fact settling on him heavier than the rain. She did not rescue him from it. Some guilt had to be carried before it could become courage. Across the street, curtains shifted and settled. A porch light hummed. Water ran along the curb in thin silver lines, carrying leaves, grit, and one corner of the page that had fallen into the puddle. Naomi looked down at it, at the spreading ink, and the road seemed to stretch backward through time. She was 12 again, sitting in the back seat of her mother's old station wagon, watching flashlight glare slide across Evelyn Brooks's face. Her mother had been wearing a cream blouse. That night, the one she saved for church and job interviews. The officer back then had asked where she worked, why she was on that road, whether the car belonged to her, whether she understood that people had been nervous lately. People. That word had haunted Naomi for years. It was never specific, never accountable, just a soft hiding place for hard prejudice. Evelyn had answered every question. She had kept her voice steady. Later, when they finally drove home, Naomi had asked why her mother had not defended herself more loudly. Evelyn had parked beneath the apartment lights, turned off the engine, and sat in the quiet for a long time before answering. Baby, the world will sometimes mistake your calm for weakness, she had said. Let it. Calm is how we keep our hands clean when other people are trying to dirty the truth. Now, on that wet Ashford road, Naomi understood the sentence differently. Calm was not silence. Calm was discipline. Calm was memory with a spine. Garrett came back with the photograph in his hand. Evelyn's face was wet, the edges softened by rain, but her eyes were still clear in the image, still looking past the camera as though she had seen this night coming. Sentimental, Garrett said, glancing at it before placing it on the hood. But it does not explain why you are here. Naomi turned her head toward him. The flashlight was no longer in her eyes. Maybe he had lowered it without realizing. Maybe even his own hand was tired of pretending. You keep asking the wrong question, she said. Garrett gave her a thin smile. And what is the right one? Naomi looked at the police badge on his chest, then at the camera on Ethan's uniform, then at the wet photograph of her mother resting beneath the flashing lights. The right question is how many people had to be ignored before I was sent here. Ethan's eyes lifted. Garrett's smile faded. The rain softened for a moment, becoming more mist than weather, and the whole street seemed suspended inside that answer. Naomi breathed in slowly. She smelled wet leather, gasoline, pine trees, and the faint metallic scent from the cuffs. None of it frightened her. It only sharpened the edges of the moment. Somewhere inside her coat pocket, her phone buzzed once, then again, a patient vibration against the silence. Garrett noticed. Expecting someone, he asked. Naomi did not answer immediately. She watched the water gather on Evelyn's photograph and slide away from her mother's face. For the first time that night, the sadness inside Naomi loosened, not into tears, but into something steadier. Her mother had not lived to see this road changed. But she had lived long enough to teach her daughter how to stand on it. The phone buzzed a third time. Ethan glanced toward the patrol car radio, where a burst of static cracked through the rain. Garrett turned slightly, annoyed by the interruption. Naomi remained still, hands cuffed, shoulders straight, eyes calm. The night had mistaken her patience for defeat. It was about to learn the difference. The patrol car radio cracked again, sharper this time, and the voice that came through did not belong to a routine dispatcher. It belonged to a man trying to sound calm while losing control of the room around him. Unit 12, confirm your location and status immediately. Garrett reached for the radio clipped near his shoulder, eyes still on Naomi. This is Unit 12. Traffic stop on Briar Glen Road. Situation under control. A pause followed. Not long, but long enough for the rain to fill it. Then the voice returned, lower now. Is the driver's name Dr. Naomi Brooks? Ethan's face changed first. His eyes moved from the radio to Naomi, then to the folders on the hood, then back to Garrett as if each piece of the night had suddenly rearranged itself into a truth he should have recognized sooner. Garrett frowned. Repeat that. I asked whether the driver is Dr. Naomi Brooks, the voice said. Federal Civil Rights Division. She was scheduled at headquarters 20 minutes ago for a closed review with Chief Harlan and County Council. They are waiting on her. The road seemed to go silent beneath the words. Even the rain sounded farther away. Garrett stared at Naomi's license, still damp in his hand, and read the name again as if the letters had changed since he first saw them. Naomi Brooks. Washington, District of Columbia. The flashlight beam dipped toward the pavement. Ethan whispered, Federal Civil Rights Division, not to anyone in particular, but as though saying it aloud might help him breathe. Naomi did not smile. She did not lift her chin in victory. She simply stood there with her wrists cuffed behind her back, rain on her face, and her mother's photograph lying on the hood beside documents Garrett had opened without consent. The truth had arrived, but it had not arrived dressed like revenge. It arrived like a mirror. Garrett pressed the radio button again. Dispatch, verify. Another voice entered, older, strained, unmistakably official. Garrett, this is Chief Harlan. Tell me you did not stop Dr. Brooks. For the first time that night, Garrett had no immediate answer. His lips parted, but the usual certainty did not come. Chief Harlan's voice tightened. She is the federal investigator assigned to the Ashford Review. She has authority from the Department of Justice liaison. She is here because of complaints against this department. Where is she? Ethan looked at Naomi's cuffed wrists. Garrett followed his gaze. The cuffs looked different now. Not like control. Like evidence. Naomi spoke gently, almost too gently for the weight of the moment. I am right here, Chief Harlan. Static hissed through the radio. Somewhere across the street, a front door opened again, but nobody called out this time. Garrett's face had gone pale under the patrol lights, though he tried to cover it by straightening his shoulders. There was a concern about suspicious behavior, he said. She matched a description. Naomi turned her head slightly. Ask him to describe it. Ethan looked down. Garrett said nothing. The radio stayed open. Chief Harlan's silence traveled through it like a closed fist. Naomi continued, her voice steady, every syllable clean enough for the camera to carry. I asked for the reason for the stop. I asked for Officer Cole's body camera to be turned on. I stated that I did not consent to a search. My bag was opened. My documents were handled in the rain. I was placed in restraints after complying with every lawful instruction. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second, and when he opened them, something in him had settled. Not comfortably, but honestly. Garrett snapped, that is not the full context. Naomi looked at him then, really looked, not as a frightened driver, not as a woman forced to stand in the rain, but as the investigator he had been waiting for without knowing it. Then you will have every opportunity to provide the full context under review. The words were calm, but Garrett flinched as though they had struck the badge itself. Chief Harlan spoke again, and this time the fear beneath his authority was impossible to hide. Officer Miller, remove the restraints. Now. Garrett did not move. For 2 seconds, pride held him in place. Then Ethan stepped forward. Sir, he said, voice quiet but firm, I will do it. Garrett turned toward him, stunned by the disobedience. Ethan did not look away. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the keys, but his voice did not. "The stop is being recorded." Naomi lowered her eyes to Evelyn's photograph, wet but still intact, and felt something deep inside her loosen. Her mother had once been sent home with no witness, no camera, no official willing to say what was obvious. Tonight, the same road had spoken into the record. As Ethan unlocked the cuffs, the metal opened with a small click that sounded almost gentle. Naomi brought her hands forward slowly, the skin at her wrists marked red from the cold. Garrett watched those marks, and for the first time, he seemed to understand that they were not just on her. They were on him. Ethan removed the cuffs from Naomi's wrists and stepped back as if the small distance might give back what the moment had taken. It did not. The red marks remained, thin and bright against her skin, and Garrett Miller's open silence remained with them. Naomi rubbed one wrist once, not to soothe it, but to feel the truth of it. Then she reached for her mother's photograph. The paper had softened from the rain, and one corner bent beneath her thumb, but Evelyn Brooks's face was still there, steady beneath the blur. Naomi held it carefully, like something living. Garrett cleared his throat. "Dr. Brooks," he said, and the title sounded strange coming from him now. Stiff and late. "There has been a misunderstanding." Naomi looked at him. Not with anger. Anger would have been easier for him to dismiss. She looked at him with the calm attention of someone who had spent years listening to people explain away harm after the harm was already done. "A misunderstanding requires two people to miss the truth," she said. "You were standing close enough to see it." Ethan lowered his eyes. Garrett's hand hovered near his belt, then fell uselessly to his side. On the radio, Chief Harlan's voice returned, controlled but thin. "Dr. Brooks, we can discuss this at headquarters. I apologize for the delay." Naomi picked up the wet folders one by one from the hood of the car. Ethan moved quickly to help, but stopped before touching them. "May I?" he asked. It was the first careful question of the night. Naomi studied him for a moment, then nodded. Together, they gathered the documents from the roof, the windshield, and the edge of the puddle. Ethan lifted the witness statement from the water with both hands, as if paper could be ashamed of where it had been left. The ink had bled at the corner, but the name was still readable. He stared at it, his expression shifting from discomfort into recognition. "I know this family," he said softly. "Their daughter used to come into the community center." Naomi placed the page into a dry folder from the back seat. "Then you know she is not a statistic." Ethan swallowed. "No, ma'am." Garrett watched them, his face hardening again because remorse had reached him, but pride was still blocking the door. "Cole, step away from those files," he said. Ethan turned slowly. The rain had flattened his hair against his forehead, making him look younger than he was, but his voice had aged in the last few minutes. "No, sir." Garrett blinked. "Excuse me." Ethan's body camera kept blinking, patient and small. This stop had no clear basis. The camera was off until she requested it. Her property was searched after she said she did not consent. She was restrained while compliant. Each sentence seemed to cost him something, but he paid it. "I will include that in my report." Garrett's jaw worked, but no words came out. "Strong enough to stand." Naomi watched Ethan, and the rain around them seemed softer now, less like punishment and more like cleansing. "Officer Cole," she said, "courage is not loud at first. Sometimes it is just the first honest sentence after a long silence." Ethan looked at her then, and shame rose in his face, open and human. "I am sorry," he said. "Not because of who you are. Because of what happened before I knew." Naomi nodded once. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. It was recognition that a door had opened and a person had chosen to walk through it. Garrett looked toward the houses, toward the windows that had watched everything. Mr. Whitaker stood on his porch again, phone lowered now, eyes fixed on the scattered scene of badge, car, rain, and truth. Nobody applauded. Nobody shouted. That would have made it too simple. Naomi placed the last folder into her leather bag and buckled it carefully. Then she turned back to Garrett. "You asked why I was here," she said. "I came to review a pattern. Tonight, you gave me a live demonstration." Garrett's face tightened. I have served this county for 19 years. Then the county has 19 years of questions to ask. Ethan inhaled sharply. Chief Harlan spoke through the radio again, but Naomi did not wait for his damage control. She opened her car door, placed Evelyn's photograph on the passenger seat, and looked once more at the road her mother had survived in silence. Then she turned to Ethan. Follow me to headquarters. Keep your camera running. Ethan nodded. Garrett stood in the rain beside his patrol car, suddenly surrounded by the authority he had spent the night misusing. Naomi slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and let the wipers sweep the windshield clean. For the first time, she could see the road ahead clearly. Naomi arrived at Ashford Police Headquarters 12 minutes later, with Ethan Cole's patrol car following behind her and Garrett Miller's cruiser trailing at a distance that felt smaller than a mile and heavier than 19 years. The rain had slowed to a mist by then, softening the hard edges of the brick building, but nothing about the place felt gentle. Fluorescent lights glowed through the front windows. A flag moved weakly on the pole near the entrance. Inside, Chief Richard Harlan waited in the main conference room with 2 county attorneys, a union representative, and a row of empty chairs arranged as if order could be created by furniture. When Naomi stepped in, the room changed before she spoke. Her coat was damp. Her wrist still carried the red marks from the cuffs. In one hand, she held the old leather bag. In the other, she held the photograph of Evelyn Brooks, carefully dried with a paper towel Ethan had given her in silence. Chief Harlan stood too quickly. Dr. Brooks, we deeply regret what happened tonight. Naomi looked at the table, at the polished surface reflecting everyone's nervous faces. Regret is a feeling, she said. Accountability is an action. No one answered. Ethan entered behind her and placed a copy of his body camera recording on the table, then stood beside the wall with his hands folded, no longer hiding behind Garrett's shadow. Garrett came in last. Without the rain, without the road, without the flashing lights, he looked smaller, though he tried to stand the same way. Naomi set Evelyn's photograph in the center of the table. The room grew still. This is my mother, she said. 26 years ago, she was stopped on Briar Glen Road after cleaning a house in this county. She filed a complaint. Nothing happened. Chief Harlan's eyes lowered, not in grief, but in recognition. Naomi opened her bag and removed the witness statements, the review notice, and the wet page that had been rescued from the puddle. Tonight was not an isolated mistake. It was a pattern with a badge on it. The words did not echo, but they stayed. By midnight, Garrett Miller had been placed on administrative leave pending external review. By morning, Chief Harlan had signed an agreement requiring independent oversight of traffic stops, mandatory body camera activation, public complaint tracking, and community review sessions held not behind closed doors, but in the neighborhoods where trust had been broken. Ethan Cole gave a sworn statement that cost him friendships inside the department, but gave him back the ability to look at himself honestly. Weeks later, at the first public meeting, Naomi sat in the front row while black parents, store clerks, nurses, teachers, and teenagers stood one by one to say what they had once been too tired or too afraid to repeat. No one clapped at first. The room was too full of old pain for easy applause. Then an elderly woman rose and said, I thought nobody wrote it down. Naomi touched her mother's photograph inside her bag and answered, we are writing it down now. Outside, the sky over Ashford cleared after 3 straight days of rain. Sunlight spread across Briar Glen Road, catching on the same pavement where Naomi had stood with cuffs on her wrists and calm in her breath. The road looked ordinary again, but it was not. Some places remember when truth finally stops passing through quietly. Naomi drove past the spot once before leaving town. She did not slow down. She did not need to. Her mother had once been humiliated there, but her daughter had returned with evidence, discipline, and a heart that refused to become cruel. Kindness had not made Naomi weak. Calm had not made her silent. Dignity had not made her powerless. It had made her impossible to erase. And maybe that is the lesson Ashford needed most. Power can force someone to stand in the rain, but it cannot decide what the rain will reveal. If you had been Officer Ethan Cole that night, would you have obeyed the senior officer, or would you have turned on the camera sooner?